Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah, Randy.
Since we founded Bombas, we've always said our socks, underwear, and T-shirts are super soft. Any new ideas?
Maybe sublimely soft.
Or disgustingly cozy.
Wait, what?
I got it. Bombas. Absurdly comfortable essentials for yourself
and for those facing homelessness.
Because one purchased equals one donated.
Wow, did we just write an ad?
Yes.
Bombas. Big comfort for everyone. Go to bombas.com/ACAST and use code ACAST for 20% off your first purchase.
There's never been a faster or easier way to start your weight loss journey than with PlushCare. PlushCare accepts most insurance plans and gives you online access to board-certified physicians who can prescribe FDA-approved weight loss medications like Wegovy and Zepbound for those who qualify. Take charge of your health and speak with a board-certified physician about a weight loss plan that's right for you. Get started today at plushcare.com/weight-loss. That's plushcare.com/weight-loss. plushcare.com/weight-loss.
Hello and welcome to The Napoleonicist and the second instalment of a special feature for you on what we've irreverently called Boney's Boys in Spain. If you haven't listened to episode 1 already, you will find an absolute riot of an episode with my good friend Josh Provan, who also joins me on this one. Josh runs the brilliant YouTube channel Adventures in Historyland, has an encyclopedic knowledge of all things military history. He's basically a walking Wikipedia of military history knowledge, but actually knows what he's talking about, unlike the fools who edit Wikipedia. No offense if you're one of those fools who edits Wikipedia, but some of the stuff on there is palpably nonsense. So the premise for this is that we're going to do a series of episodes looking at a number of Napoleon's marshals. And we're factoring this into Napoleon Month because it is obviously important to look at the types of people that Napoleon sent out to do his bidding and had under his immediate command. We've talked already in the first instalment about Soult, Victor, Masséna, and Ney. And today we're going to focus on Marmont, Jourdan, and Suchet. Josh, great to have you back. How have you been in the 3 minutes since we finished recording episode 1?
Well, it's been tough, and it's been good. It was the worst of times and the best of times. And I was pondering to myself what a walking encyclopedia would physically look like, and I decided it would look quite scary. So
you're coping okay from the withdrawals of the last episode, all of about 30 seconds ago?
Well, I'm not going to lie to you, Zach. It's been tough, but I've managed to get through.
That's all right. I'm here to help you scratch that Napoleonic martial itch, if such a thing ever existed. Now, we're going to head straight back in. We discussed in the first episode about the nature of the Marshalsea, for those who are struggling to kind of orientate themselves here. So I would urge you, go back and have a listen to that first episode. But we're going to kick off with Marshal Marmont. We're roughly going through these in a sort of chronological order, having looked at Soult, Victor, Masséna, and Ney, all of whom at least have their first contact with the British forces in the early part of the Peninsular War. Marmont is a different character. I'm going to be honest straight away. I like Marmont. I've always had a huge amount of respect for the guy. Ever since I first started researching properly this period and looking at the Salamanca campaign. And I can't help but feeling that he's treated very harshly. He has the title the Duke of Ragusa, but because he surrendered Paris to the Allies in 1814, the French have a verb for betray, which is raguser. So if you are betraying someone, you are doing a ragusa. You are literally doing a Marmont, which seems quite harsh to me. He was very close to Napoleon, widely considered to have been Napoleon's protege. was with him from the start pretty much. He was at Toulon, was an aide to Napoleon in Italy and Egypt, was one of those loyal few who returned from Egypt with Napoleon when Napoleon went off to conduct his coup in France, was made a general over the course of that campaign after taking his involvement in the taking of Malta, general of division at Marengo. This is a guy who does very well, is very close to Napoleon, and I think is quite underrated. I'm struck by something that Rory Muir said recently, which was that he was very good up until the point when he wasn't, which isn't an official quote from Rory, I should add, but is a great. It was made on Twitter, so don't start sticking that in your research on the period. But it's a great way of kind of describing the guy. Josh, I've spoken far too much already. Your thoughts on Ragusa?
Yeah, that was a brilliant nugget that I came across as well. You're pulling a Marmont if you're being disloyal. He is France's Benedict Arnold, apparently. This is terminology. If you betray someone in America, you are Benedict Arnold. If you do it in France, you are Ragusa. Fascinating that. Yeah, Marmont, I agree. I've always quite liked Marmont. And like many of the marshals who we have discussed, they're all solid soldiers. They're all good until a certain point. This point of commonality is a gentleman by the name of the Duke of Wellington, almost invariably. And he is the reason why these men are not considered great soldiers in the Napoleonic Wars. He basically stains them with the stigma of defeat, and usually quite embarrassing defeats, and none more so than poor Marshal Marmont. And it's because of Salamanca. This is the worst luck. Yet up until that day, when the battle kicked off, he did everything right. He, as you said, he was sort of a wonder child. He was the youngest of the marshals. He was a general division at 26. He was one of the ones who was a little angry with his buddy, and they were quite good friends, Napoleon, for not being a marshal in 1804. But he got it in 1809, hence his title as well, I believe, which is derived from something he did in Italy at some point, which I forget precisely what it was.
I think he was forcing the Russians away from the city of Ragusa.
Oh yes, he lifted the siege or something, wasn't it? So, yeah. Okay. So it's this kind of vague thing, but he was also an artillery command. He was an artilleryman by nature, so he was very much like Napoleon in that sense. He was, some of the things I wrote down about him is like he was energetic, calculating, very skilled officer, very capable officer. And unlike some of the other marshals who went to Spain, except for Sultan Massena, of the ones we just talked about, he actually had independent victories to his name previous to coming out. So victories where Napoleon was not present to tell him what to do. And when he got to Spain, he did the thing where you capture a bunch of forts, and then he was stuck with the problem of the disunited nature of French command in Spain. Nobody really knew who was actually in effective command. Was it the king? Was it his chief of staff? Was it the new guy that Napoleon had sent out? Was it like Soult, who was still hanging around somewhere in the north, I think? It's like just a mess. So that how do you manage your logistics? How do you get an army to function properly when you can't get it to cooperate with the rest of the forces? Meanwhile, a united army is barreling towards the Portuguese frontier, and it's taking cities at a frightening speed as well before they can be relieved. So obviously in a thrice, practically, Wellington takes Badajoz and Ciudad Rodrigo with infamous results, but nevertheless he takes them very fast, and he presses into Spain. Now Marmont has to face this, and this is where actually he shines very brightly. He comes up against Wellington, and he matches him for guile and skill in maneuver. Every time Wellington turns, he's there before him. He anticipates where he's going to go, and he blocks him. They're both jockeying for position. It's a fascinating little part of the campaign where it's actually not clear who has the upper hand until he just, again, as is such the case with the Marshals, he makes a right call based on wrong intelligence. And he does this in the face of an enemy who is prepared to attack. That is, he thinks Wellington is retreating. He's not. He's just moving forces as he has been all the last couple of weeks. And he presses on to try and head him off. This overextends his left flank and allows Wellington to basically defeat him in detail. And he does this at Salamanca. Now, one of the big questions of Salamanca, of course, is had a Royal Artillery shell not intervened on the I think it's the he was on the Arapire Grande, wasn't he?
He was, yeah.
Was it the lesser one?
No, it was,
yeah.
it was the greater, because the British hold the lesser, and there's a phase very early on where Wellington misconstrues the greater Arapile as a lesser prize, and so focuses on the lesser, occupies that, and then suddenly sends I forget who he sends forwards, but he sends troops forwards to try and take it, only they arrive too late to get there first.
Exactly, yes. So had not a shell intervened in the proceedings, wounding Marmont quite badly and removing him from the field, could he have at least mitigated the unfolding disaster? Could he maybe only lost one division, or had one division broken and maybe stopped the others, and maybe been able to put up a defense? Because it was not a bad position. He had the heights, he had troops that could have defended them. Maybe if he could have made it over there to his extreme left, he could have staunched the bleeding, perhaps. But we can't know, because it's actually unclear as to when he began to realize things were going wrong. And then undoubtedly a shell wounded him and several of his staff, wounded his successor as well. I think it was General Boney. And everything went to pot for the French until Clausel managed to cobble together a counterattack, which kind of staved off utter defeat.
And Clausel himself is wounded. I mean, it is, talk about lucky shots from the artillery, but it's the artillery's kind of shining moment of the conflict in many respects. You have Marmont, Clausel, and Bonnet, all of whom are taken out by British artillery. It's incredible. But as you say, I mean, I would actually go further. I would say he was winning that campaign. A couple of moments occur to me. We have to bear in mind that he comes to power, if you like, as commander of the Army of Portugal. He takes the command in the aftermath of Fuente de Onuro. And it strikes me that Marmont was a very careful individual. He kind of saw a pattern that if you gave Wellington what he wanted and attacked him on ground of his choosing, it didn't go well. And so as a result of that, he wasn't prepared to give Wellington that. And the demonstration of that was at San Cristobal, when Wellington's army deployed. And there's a little attempt made to try and kind of tempt the other side in. And it doesn't actually play out. Neither side is willing to budge. And so Marmont pulls his army back behind the Duero, abandons two forts that Wellington's been besieging inside Salamanca. They're basically fortified convents, but they're very solid structures. Loses those men in the process, but does absolutely the right thing. And then after Wellington chases him to the Duero, does this incredible thing. He catches Wellington on the hop. It's a bit like Salt in the Pyrenees, for my liking, in that Wellington doesn't quite know what's happening. There's a feint across one of the fords, and then in an incredible piece of force marching, that force withdraws, marches along the northern bank of the Douro, recrosses the Douro further up, and effectively what Marmont has done is turned Wellington's flank. And there's this horrendous scramble that Wellington's in, trying to pull his army back and form a new defensive line. And Marmont was very disappointed that he didn't kind of get more out of it. And then, as you say, Salamanca, in the aftermath of that maneuver, the parallel marching, where these two forces are within cannon shot almost of one another, neither side making a mistake. Marmont actually gets to, what's the river that flows through Salamanca? The Tormes. Yeah, the Tormes.
Yes, it's Tormes, I think.
Crosses the Tormes first, is effectively turning Wellington's flank again. He's managed to outmarch him. And then is continuing that sweeping maneuver around, if you like, the side of the Allied army, keeps marching to the west. And it is such a small mistake. It's a couple of divisions that go too far, too fast along the high ground. And I want to take a moment to dwell on what I affectionately call Salamanca chicken, because those of you who were on social media a little while back might remember that a few of us who talk about Peninsular War type stuff were discussing the concept of a dish called Salamanca chicken. The reason that we're focusing on chicken is because there is a very famous story that Wellington saw these two units, Thermier and McCune, had marched too far, were isolated from the rest of the French force, was eating a chicken leg, and abandoned dinner, threw the chicken over his shoulder, said, "By God, that'll do," and rode off to speak to the commander of the 3rd and 5th Division to instigate the attack. And so we were discussing what would it take to, what type of dish should Salamanca chicken be if we were going to create a dish to celebrate the British success. There were discussions that the chicken should be thrown over the shoulder into whatever cooking utensil would be best appropriate. It needs to be cooked within 40 minutes. Some good French wine should probably feature in some respect. So if you are a chef and you have an idea for how to make the most out of Salamanca chicken, drop me a line and we'll try to host some kind of grand dinner on a Salamanca anniversary at some point and try your culinary exploits. But enough about the silliness of Salamanca chicken. It's an incredible move by Wellington. With what you said about him being wounded, I do wonder to what extent that is a case of saving face. In the sense that essentially what he needs to do is order Thermier and McCune to halt and allow time for the other divisions to close that gap, which isn't huge. And that could have been sent by an aide. He didn't need to go there in person. Now, of course, if it was Wellington, we would have said, well, this is Wellington's command style. He's always in the thick of the action. So perhaps that's unduly harsh for me to make that criticism of Marmont. If Marmont had been on the ground, it's possible that Topin's division, which was to the south a little way, could perhaps have been brought up more swiftly, as opposed to just kind of retiring and not really playing much of a role in the battle. But it wasn't a catastrophic mistake. For those people who don't know much about Salamanca, I wholeheartedly recommend Rory Muir's book on this, Salamanca 1812, where he is very fair, but also very clinical in looking at the different accounts of the battle and establishing what is true of Salamanca and what is hearsay. And he makes the point that this was not a catastrophic error. This was a small mistake, and it took somebody like Wellington, with forces deployed in the way that Wellington had them deployed, to capitalize on that success. So I wouldn't quite say he was unlucky at Salamanca, and I do think the comment about how he was mounting his horse to ride off to issue those counter orders is a little bit duplicitous.
It's certainly convenient, isn't it? it's a perfect excuse to tell Napoleon, if you fudge the timings a little, I was wounded and removed from the battle, so not my fault. I have a certain amount of sympathy for the idea that he was wounded before he could do anything about it, because of what Lieutenant Parkin said, how he described the incident, although he doesn't describe when exactly it happened, but he did describe Marmont mounting his horse to ride to the left. For what reason, I don't know, but something happened before things got really bad. This shell did seem to interpose itself at that point. I also wonder if the fact he didn't send aids actually kind of proves the point that he was riding himself. So if I was to explain that, it would be to create the scenario that he didn't think anything was going wrong. He got reports or saw that there was action going on the far left. Not sure what you could see. I'm not sure what he could actually see from that position. So this could all be just rubbish, but following through with the idea, he doesn't do anything. Then he realizes something has gone terribly wrong, and he might as well ride himself, because that's where the danger point is, and that's when the shell hits. But that would be my best way of saying that. That's my way of saying that if he didn't send, that's why he's riding himself, because he actually didn't send anybody to correct the march.
I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, that sounds entirely reasonable. You could say, well, should he have had a better handle on his forces? The position is strung out at Salamanca, it has to be said. I mean, the army's in a 7 or 8 mile long arc, which is significant for context. Waterloo is a very confined battlefield. It bucks the trend. But Waterloo is maybe a couple of miles across, by a mile and a half deep. It's really a tiny field. So you can make the argument that, perhaps he's strung his army out a little bit too much. But yeah, I think you make a good point that if it hadn't been for this consecutive wounding of commanders, Salamanca probably wouldn't have been anything like on the scale of the disaster that it was for the French. There's no question about that. Because a commander being in the field and being able to make the relevant decisions could have done the right things. And equally, Clausel deserves a lot of credit for going in with when the Allied 4th Division breaks, and following that up. So the French do the best they can in a difficult situation. But I think what the scale of what goes wrong for them at Salamanca tends to overshadow just how good the rest of the campaign was. Because if it hadn't been for that mistake, Wellington was back at the Portuguese border. Yeah. It was, in effect, what would have happened at Burgos, except that it wouldn't have been on the scale of the setback that heading back from Burgos to Ciudad Rodrigo was for the Allies.
I agree. I think Marmont, but basically to deny Wellington access to Spain is winning. And Marmont was doing that. And that was what he was doing when he extended his left, because he thought Wellington's going to turn back on himself and try and loop back around. So I'm going to cut him off again. So I'm just putting these divisions in motion, as we've been doing every day for the last week and a half or something like that, or more. Since he crossed the border, I've been heading him off. He's been turning. I've been trying to get around him. As you said, Marmont understood completely. You have to maneuver against Wellington. You cannot be fixed. And it was working. Unfortunately, he maneuvered just a little bit too much. As you just said, was Rory Moore, as you abbreviated for Rory Moore, he made one mistake, and that was, he was doing really well until that one mistake.
He really was. Of course, having been wounded, he doesn't see action for a little while. He doesn't return to Spain after that. But was at Dresden, at Leipzig, demonstrated considerable skill in the fight during the retreats in the 1814 defense of France, but then lost at Leon, moved too slowly to attack the Allied left there, was caught by surprise by an Allied attack in turn, but in fairness, Napoleon's whole force was outnumbered by about 2-1. So by this point, Marmont's commanding a force of about 10,000 men. So far smaller than the army of Portugal that he was handling a couple of years before, which was somewhere in the region of sort of 50, 60,000. So numbers weren't on his side on that occasion.
This is where we get to the Ragusa bit, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. And I think it's unfair. Okay, Napoleon was so wounded by this what felt like a personal betrayal, that he did that thing that Napoleon did, and he blackened Marmont's name for all time, even though the rest of the marshals had already pretty much begun proceedings to try and end the war there. He was only supposedly persuaded once he found out that Marmont had surrendered. Now, I personally think that Marmont again did the right thing. What on earth point? What could he do? What? It's when people say he was a vile betrayer and stuff. Look at the situation the guy was in. What is anyone humanly supposed to do against this amount of opposition with that amount of men, with no hope feasibly of actually pulling off anything meaningful except extending the war another year or something, by which time Wellington would be in Paris probably, and you'd have not 3 armies but 4 armies knocking at the door. So it's like, no, it's perfectly understandable, disappointing as it is to one who values, I guess, consistency or something like that, or some rot like that. But in terms of the military situation, he had no option.
Absolutely. I mean, the writing was on the wall. You could say that the writing was on the wall much earlier. It would have been the wise thing for Napoleon to do, to have taken peace terms rather than to roll the dice again, as was his way. But that's a debate for another day. But I mean, everybody likes to emphasize his disloyalty to Napoleon. But when it comes to loyalty, he stayed loyal to his follow-up oath, if you will, which was to Louis XVIII. And in 1815, he's not one of those who switches back to Napoleon. He's one of those who actually, in the end, votes to execute Ney. So
he goes to Ghent as well in 1815, like Victor. Goes with Louis to exile.
So another man of his word in many respects.
Absolutely, and but he was much like Grouchy and the King of Sweden. He lived the rest of his life under the shadow of this betrayal of Napoleon, and he died in exile, I believe, in Italy, I think, or Switzerland or something like that. He wrote memoirs trying to defend himself and his decisions, and I think a monograph on modern commanders and things like that. He lived out his life quite comfortably, though, generally speaking, but his reputation is, first of all, tarnished because of the one mistake he made in Spain. The magnitude of the disaster coloring his reputation, so that now people will actually say Marmont wasn't a match for Wellington. He was a match for Wellington, certainly on the strategic level. But it's just, you do not make, because let's put it this way, to sum up, whoever made the first mistake was going to pay heavily for that mistake, and Marmont was the one who made the first mistake.
Yeah, strongly agree with all that you've said there. So having rehabilitated, or attempted to rehabilitate, Marmont's reputation, let's move on to another, Jean-Baptiste Jourdan. So this guy was born into a surgeon's family, so not what you might term peasantry by any stretch of the imagination, but nonetheless enlisted as a private in the Royal Army. He has quite a colourful early career. Fought in the American War of Independence, fought in the West Indies, became sick. He's at Genappe, he's at Fleurus, rose very rapidly during the French Revolution. and he's one of the crop of the first batch of marshals, being one of those who's appointed in 1804.
Yeah, he's another one of those sort of unclear ones as to he's one of the ones that is a bit more unclear as to why he's made a marshal. I think, except for his long career in the army and his experience during the French Revolutionary War. He because he opposed Napoleon's coup and everything as well, I believe. He wasn't on the side at Brumaire, and he did a lot of administrative positions thereafter and stuff. Like a lot of the other marshals, his experience comes from service in the Royalist Army and in the armies of the Revolution. So a lot like the early marshals, the 1804 marshals, that trait is there with him as well. But again, he's one of those ones that you can't quite put a finger on why exactly he gets the baton, but he gets it, and then he does admit it's mostly administrative positions thereafter, sort of, I think, after he gets the marshalate, and then he becomes chief of staff to Napoleon's brother in Spain, which is a thankless task.
Something of a poisoned chalice, isn't it? I mean, he's at Talavera.
Yes.
We all know how that pans out. He's at Vittoria. Now, you could make the argument that he unfairly takes the blame for Vittoria because he advised against forcing the issue. He advised against battle. The mistakes that the French made at Vittoria were considerable. I mean, leaving the bridges intact against a guy like Wellington, knowing about Salamanca, that's not brilliant in terms of forethought. I haven't got a huge amount to criticize on Jourdan, to be honest with you.
No, neither do I. Neither do I. There's not even a whole much you can say about him because he's always under the shadow of Joseph, and obviously the rule is if you are in the field and you have a king in the field, the king is the guy in charge, technically speaking. And Jourdan, I don't think Jourdan was a terribly good chief of staff. I have read criticisms that a lot of the confusion that led to Salamanca and Marmont being on his own there is mostly to do with Jourdan's staff work, and but at the same time, if Joseph isn't being enough of a leader, it's not Jourdan's duty to be that leader for him. He's the chief of staff, King of Spain, in quotes. So the most he certainly Napoleon certainly blamed him for Vittoria. He had certainly the excuse that Sire, I told your brother not to do it, not to fight here, but I'm just under orders. So I think it's an open question as to whether he is a Bonaparte scapegoat, or the situation in Spain was just beyond his talents as a chief of staff.
Yeah, I mean, it was an incredibly difficult situation, wasn't it? Because Joseph was not the right man for the monarchy in Spain. I mean, was there such a person who could have taken up that position and done a good job? Well, the only contender that perhaps might have done well in Spain is the last person we're going to talk about. We'll get to them in a moment. That's Suchet. But out of Napoleon's family, I mean, Joseph didn't want to go. It was always going to anger the Spaniards anyway to add an additional insult. Not only had he arrested the Spanish royal family, not only was he taking over their family, he was also imposing an external ruler upon them. And while some were willing to work with the French, some Spaniards were willing to work with the French, I'm not remotely surprised that somebody like Joseph found it a struggle. He'd actually, I would say, done quite well as King of Naples.
Yeah. I would agree with that. It's just Spain was such a mess. Why on earth he chose Joseph, or even, I mean, there was probably more of a case to make one of the Marshals king of Spain than one of his family. Maybe Lucien, who was the most talented of the Bonaparte brothers when it came to policy. But it's it's just a bad job to get.
It really was.
And obviously.
And so, talking about people who, in fact, the only person really who comes out well from their Spanish career, let's take it on to Suchet. My notes tell me that he's the Duke of Albuera, which caught me a little bit by surprise.
I think it's actually the Duke of Albufera, not Albuera. Very close, though. I almost thought it was Albuera as well, but it's actually, I think, Albufera. Yeah, yes.
Probably just illiteracy on my part then. But as I say, one of the few who doesn't make a hash of things in Spain, rightly or wrongly. I mean, irrespective of whether or not that interpretation is harsh, there's no obvious failing of his time in Spain. Admittedly, there's also no instance where he's having to fight the Brits under Wellington, which may have a role to play with it. But as a leader and as a governor of Catalonia, which he is the position that he eventually receives, he does quite well. He's seen as a fair leader, and he's another one. Long association is there with Napoleon in the Italian campaign, the first Italian campaign. So at Lodi, Castiglione, Mantua, Arco, Rivoli, was a general of brigade from 1798, married into the Bonaparte family, which was an interesting one. I think it was Joseph Bonaparte's niece, then became chief of staff.
I'm unsure on that, but but I didn't actually know he married into the Bonaparte family. Actually, that's interesting. Maybe he should have been king of Spain.
That's what I'm kind of thinking as we're discussing it. Perhaps he would have been a better choice. But then he's also at Ulm, Austerlitz, Jena, and his career in Spain is limited to his work in Catalonia, where we should say becomes Marshal in 1811, so the latest of all of them. Out of the ones that we looked at today, Marmont is the next nearest, because Marmont gets his marshalsea at Znaim, actually, in 1809, just after Wagram. So, I mean, just generally positive. I believe he's responsible for a relatively successful campaign in Valencia, where he's grappling with a smaller British force, which is sent in 1812 as part of a series of diversions to keep other armies in Spain occupied. But then also oversaw kind of a textbook withdrawal at the end of the Peninsular War, when the game was up and the French are pulling back across the Pyrenees, and was kind of a thorn, I always feel, in Wellington's side during that Pyrenees campaign, because you've always got to have one eye on the fact that you've got Suchet with a force, and yes, okay, untested against Wellington, but still a threat, and still a significant threat, more importantly.
Yeah, this is true. I will often, so one of the things that's often leveled against Wellington is that he never commanded hundreds of thousands of men. Okay. Now I will usually counter that by saying, what in his career gives you the impression he couldn't? Now, this I will extend also to Suchet. Now, the main reason he comes out of Spain, I think, with not only he wins his marshalsea in Spain, and he wins his title in Spain. He's the only marshal and French general, I think, to do that. The only reason or the principal reason that this happens, I think, is because he is not opposed to the Duke of Wellington. Therefore, he doesn't get the treatment that all the other great marshals got, and therefore is able to come up with enhanced reputation unusually. But I will extend what I extend to Wellington to him. There's nothing in his career that says that he would not have performed well against Wellington. His record is good, like you say, excellent record against the Spanish armies in Catalonia. A bit of a pounding match to take Valencia, but he does take it. There is a little wobble when he opposes the British at Tarragona. I believe that I think it's General Murray, not Wellington's Murray, but a different General Murray, actually gets the better of him. But then there's some sort of debacle where he retreats, and there's a big court martial to do with this, because actually he tosses it all out the window. I'm curious as to whether this gives an insight as to what he might have been like if he was facing a determined British commander all the time. As you say, he had some trouble here with this smaller British army, but overall he shone in Spain, and the only French commander to do so. And like you say, he's always there. I often also like to point out to people who say that Suchet, I do caution people when they talk about Suchet not to take him, not to take the fact that he was good in Spain as an idea that he was somehow more brilliant than he was, because while he did nothing wrong and he did a lot of things very well, we should also point out that he may not have been able to actually leave Catalonia to support the others should he needed to, because actually I did read somewhere that it can be interpreted that he was actually bogged down and couldn't probably extract his men from the province and still hold it, and he would want to still hold it. Therefore, he was a threat, but probably not one that could have actually been effective unless he was able to release his forces more freely. But as a result, nevertheless, whatever the reasons are, as a result, his reputation is much better than those who were considered his peers, who went to Spain to fight. And like you say, he was also, I think only Soult fought as long in Spain as Suchet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. I do wonder whether sort of law of averages would mean that had Wellington faced Suchet, having bested Soult, Victor, Masséna, Marmont, would Suchet have done anything radically different? Part of me is skeptical. Now, some will say, well, that's just you being a Briton full of British hyperbole. But I mean, just look at the record. There's nothing that leads me to believe that Soult was a palpably worse commander than Suchet. And Soult did a seriously good job, as we discussed in the first episode. So I'm reluctant to say that Suchet's reputation has been overblown, but I'm just not convinced that he's necessarily that much better than his contemporaries, much though he did a good job. And what I will not take away from him is his successful job as governor, which was key. And I think that's certainly something that's been missing from our conversations. A lot of these individuals, they're moving around, they're on active operations. We haven't looked at their styles as individuals trying to keep the populace happy. But Suchet succeeds where elsewhere in Spain, the Napoleonic regime doesn't do particularly well.
Yes, this is absolutely true. We've mentioned the looting of Masséna. We need to say that Soult was little different. And I think Marmont wasn't there long enough, and he was mostly fighting, so I don't think he really had any civil or political responsibility particularly before he was invalided out. So yes, Suchet absolutely is a much more capable general and governor, and probably the man Napoleon, he's of the caliber of men that Napoleon probably needed in Spain. Guy who could perhaps pacify as well as conquer. and that is absolutely the case, like you say. And as I said before, I think it's an open question as to whether or not he's as good as people think he is, just because he came out of Spain well. And like you say, he did get his army out as well, which is obviously quite a great feat, as everything was falling apart when he had to get out. But I've tried to look at his record afterwards, and in 1815, obviously he went back to Napoleon, but was unable to defend the southern frontier against the Austrians, and was being convincingly forced back when news of the fall of Paris reached him and the armistice. I'm not sure what that indicates precisely.
Well, the numbers are not in his favor, are they? Which doesn't help the situation.
He was driven out of the passes, and there's a part of me that thinks that you should be able to hold passes, but still, it's true. He was up against it. Not clear at all, like Marmont.
I mean, he's one of those who's eventually forgiven by the Bourbons, isn't he, in 1819?
Yeah.
But then actually decides to stay in retirement, despite it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So definitely a very interesting guy. Not a guy a lot of people know about. To a great extent, for some reason or other, you'd think he'd be sort of the hat that people defending the French army in Spain would want to wear. But apart from but all I can say about him is essentially that he is exactly what is on the tin. He was very successful in his theater. The only theater in Spain that showed any success was his. Any sort of sustained success, I should say, I guess, was his. And it's anybody's guess what would have happened if he'd been up against Wellington. I, like you, actually think that he was probably... He doesn't seem as brilliant as Marmont. He doesn't seem as talented as Massena. And he seems only as good, Soult, I would think. And maybe not even as good as Soult, I'm not sure. But certainly as good as Soult. Soult wouldn't be worse than him, like you said. And that gives me to believe that there's probably a high percentage that Wellington would have treated him like he treated all the others. But nevertheless, open question.
It is. And it's an interesting one that people might want to pick up online. There's another question that I think we have to ask ourselves just before we wrap all of this up, which is, of the generals, as opposed to the marshals, who serve in Spain, who strikes you as an individual who did very well, but perhaps has been overlooked? I mean, the one for me that I've mentioned already is Clausel, and what he managed to do to the French army of Portugal in the 1812 campaign. Another contender perhaps might be Caffarelli for his occupations with the Army of the North, but then what happens in 1812 there isn't a hugely successful campaign. So I'm inclined to give it more to Clausel. What's your sense?
That's actually a very interesting question. It's not one I've given a lot of thought to. I guess divisional commanders, I guess they would be. You have people like Foy. He was solid, I think. Not independent command, I don't think. I think he was mostly serving under people, so less a general of independent command, but definitely one who was respected. I think I agree about Clausel, that what he managed to achieve first of all, he knew not to defend Madrid. Give it up. That will give the dog a bone, and I will be able to escape. That in itself is a nice psychological insight, which will allow the French army to rally. And so I think I would agree about Clausel possibly being the overlooked star, perhaps, of the French army in Spain. I believe Ray had a decent decent stint in Spain as well. Foy and Troy were two of the guys who annoyed Napoleon at Waterloo by trying to tell him how to fight Wellington for certain. And he ignored them. But
well, Foy was well placed to know, of course, having been at Salamanca, because I believe it's Foy who says of Salamanca that this battle raises Wellington almost to the level of Marlborough. It was a battle in the style of Frederick the Great. And when you look at the scale of success at Salamanca, it's difficult to argue with that. You know, this guy knew what he was talking about. So,
and for the French, if you compare a British general to Marlborough, that's a big deal, because they actually had a great deal of respect for Marlborough. There are songs written about Marlborough in France, about how basically they wish he was dead because he was such a problem. You know, I forget how to say the name, but it's set to the tune of "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow." I think it's something like Marlborough se vante de guerre or something like that. Marlborough has gone away from the war. And so for a French general to say that about an English general, to compare him to Marlborough, that's actually a really, really big deal. And so, yeah, Foy was also, I believe, he was able to extract his division from Salamanca as well.
Yeah. But it was Ferry Ferry who made the stand and ended up, I think, was cut in half by a cannonball in the end, wasn't he? It was an unpleasant way to go, but they stood. But yeah, Foy got his division away, I think.
British artillery at Salamanca, seriously.
Incredible, it really was. Josh, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for joining me. Remind people where they can find out more about you and your YouTube channel and your Twitter handle.
Okay, well, the easy thing to do is just to go to the website adventuresinhistoryland.com, and if you find me there, you'll find me everywhere. But if you just want to go to Twitter, I am at Land of History. And if you want to go straight to YouTube, where I have videos with a well-known face on this podcast, Marcus Cribb, about the Duke of Wellington, then you find me at Adventures in Historyland there as well. Also stuff about the Russian campaign with Jimmy Chen. And I am on Facebook just under my own name, Joshua Provan. But easy, just go to the website, adventuresinhistoryland.com, and if you find me there, you'll find me everywhere. And
tell people about your book as well.
My book at the second, my first book is at the second available on Amazon. Maybe available in stores. I've not actually been in a bookstore this year for reasons, so I don't know whether it's on shelves. But my book, which is out at the moment, is called Wild East: The British in Japan, 1854 to 1868. And it tells a story about Britain's first encounters, diplomatic encounters and military encounters with the Empire of Japan.
And
more to come next year.
Yes, I was about to say, you've got a second one coming out, haven't you?
Yes, I have a second one coming out next year, which is slightly more germane to this channel, which is about the British in India. It is called Bullocks, Grain and Good Madeira, and it focuses on the Maratha and Jat campaigns of 1803 to 1806, which is a fascinating subject. I loved researching it. It features the Duke of Wellington, it features Lord Lake, it features many famous and little known Indian characters, and the title itself is kind of a summary of what many officers seem to think you needed to fight in India.
So, certainly the Bullocks, I would agree with. As to the Madeira, well, I'll leave that to connoisseurs of Madeira to comment on. Josh, it's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much for joining me for what, for us at least, has been a marathon recording session. That was Josh Provan joining me in the second instalment of a series on Napoleon's Marshals, which we irreverently called Boney's Boys in Spain. We will be continuing our series of special features on Napoleon's leading military lights in the new year. That wraps up Napoleon Month. A big thank you to everyone who has taken part. Josh, Will Fletcher, Jimmy Chen, Geraint Thatcher, Marcus Cribb, Vanya Bellinger, Rachel Stark, Luke Daly-Groves, Gavin Lewis, and Beatrice de Graaf. People are often kind enough to say really nice things about this podcast, which I'm always very pleasantly surprised by. But the truth is that this channel only has the following that it does because of the hard work of my brilliant guests bringing you lively and engaging interviews. So frankly, the success of this podcast is down to them and them alone. Thank you also to everyone who's got involved with tweets, votes for Napoleon's greatest victory, social media posts, questions, forum comments, and shares. We didn't quite get Napoleon trending on Twitter, but that never really mattered. The point is that through lockdown, you hopefully have the chance to escape the despondency of the pandemic by having a chat about one of history's greatest and most controversial figures. The Napoleon Assist will return in December with weekly pods up until Christmas, including a reviews episode, an interview with Gareth Glover, and a piece by me. In the meantime, if you are new here, please do scroll back over the previous listings on the Napoleon Assist. There are now around 80 episodes to enjoy on a wide range of areas. And don't forget that some of these interviews can now be enjoyed on the Napoleon Assist YouTube channel. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please do hit the like and subscribe buttons and the notification bell so that you know as soon as the new episodes go live. If you're on Twitter and want to get in touch or join the discussion, you can find me at ZWhiteHistory and in the world's leading Napoleonic era forum, the NapoleonicWars.net. Until next time, I'm Zach White. This has been Napoleon Month on the Napoleon Assist. Take care, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, stay kind, and as always, thank you for listening.
Even on a budget, quality is non-negotiable. That's why Quince is the place to score high-end essentials at 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Get your hands on buttery soft cashmere sweaters from just $60, Italian leather jackets, and so much more. And the best part about Quince, they exclusively partner with factories committed to safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. Elevate your style without the elevated price tag with Quince. Go to quince.com/upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns.